I was also asked by Lawrence and Fred if I could say something about the conference itself. And then I'll start with this picture of Richard sitting at TBI. We all recognize the wall, right? And I like to think that he would be so chuffed with this meeting. He would love it. Because just the thought that TBI is the fulcrum that brought all these people together, and that actually the number of people working now out of TBI at the Turkana Basin in Kenya has grown exponentially, and all sorts of things are being done. So I think he would have loved it. Okay, however, you have to remember what happened this week. And I stayed till 3:30 a.m. putting these pictures together. So please pay attention. So, what do we have? We had talks about Richard himself and his work and TBI. And the first of those talks was by Woody, who told us a very personal story of his long, long friendship with Richard and all they did together, and how that friendship was maintained to the end and it was cemented through the science. We heard from Louise. Where is Louise? We heard from Louise about her dad, but also about what started at Kubifora and ended up 60 years later being, what does she say there? 452 hominin specimens. Just staggering achievement. We heard from Dino about the future of this institution, going even beyond the paleosciences to embrace other aspects of ecology, epidemiology, modern populations, and a new chapter in the history of TBI. We also heard from Patricia to remind us that Richard, yes, he was a scientist, but he was a deep conservationist too, which in this conference we didn't talk. Then I sort of lumped together, I'm afraid, all the people who had bits of theory, models, data, and I know it's not a coherent grouping here, but we had Rob telling us about endemism, dynamic processes, the Afrotropical model. We had Carol telling us about new phylogenies, new ways of analyzing large bodies of data to revisit the relationship of early hominins. Then we had two very different renditions of what it took to be a modern human, right? And it's fabulous to actually look at two very different perspectives on what that problem is. John this morning, sorry, John, I just couldn't add this morning's talks properly. But John was telling us about the new frontiers. And perhaps something we notice. So if you're in Europe, so much is about Neanderthals, right? And Neanderthals nowadays is all about, you know, ancient DNA and admixture and introgressions and, you know, site formation and how many times you can plot a stone tool with a total station and so. But those new frontiers will come also to the tropics, maybe with paleoproteomics instead of ancient DNA, but they will come. He also raised major issues about repatriation. That's a conversation to be had in more detail. We also had talks about the nature of the data itself, right? So we heard through Daniel, from Michaelis and Indre, about how, you know, our data are all full of biases and problems, etc. But let's make something out of those issues. Let's use the data in a way that actually those issues become part of what we're looking at. And then we heard from Dene, you know, let's create huge databases. Let's put the data out there. It was very late, so I stopped writing little notes, I'm afraid. Bear with me. Okay, so I put together all the isotopes. And I was then surprised. I said, what, there's only 4 of them? After this week, I thought there were like 15. How come these 4 people made so much noise? It was quite extraordinary. Anyway, we had a fabulous set of isotope talks. And the permeation no, doesn't exist. The reach of the isotope data, and looked at also from the stories that Julia and Thuri told us of how difficult it was at the beginning and how they were not accepted. And they kept insisting, these data, we should be paying attention. This is a way of looking at the past. And then the success. And now, you know, diets, temperature, ecologies, carbonates, soils, you know, they're everywhere, right? Anyway, but there was only 4 of them. Then I put together also TAFO, geochron, chron, etc. And these were also fabulous, right? So we had Kay giving us a masterful talk, which at least I'll go home and watch again, and perhaps again. And among the many things, I know there was a focus on the scales of questions and scales of the evidence, but I thought, you know, she was saying, you know, there isn't that much difference. The systems are stable. And that should be something to be considered when we're looking at them all. Craig, amazing, and the future of all the core data and the studies, etc. And lovely to hear again about the pigs, and how the pigs were very unhappy. We heard from Patrick with the role of petrology and the potential that petrology can bring to the whole system, and that we're probably seriously underusing. Not for long, Patrick. And then we had 3 talks, which I loved. Well, first of all, Troy's excitement. You know, it was contagious. Daryl, you were not that excited. And Marine, with her luminescence. What is special about the 3 talks, even though they were giving us case studies and examples, is that they are all breaking ground on dating methods. And this is just stunning. So the opportunities, so I work in a part of the chronology, that dating is a serious issue. So to have people there trying to solve the problem of how we date different sediments, it was fantastic. And then I went chronological. So we had 2 talks on the Oligocene. That's Natasha with Hyraxes. I will associate now forever the Oligocene with Hyraxes. We had John telling us about the missing years and the extraordinary. This is quite extraordinary when you think about it, right? The amount of information that is filling that gap, right? So this is an extraordinary achievement. Then we had the Miocene. Again, when you look at it, there are not that many, right? And it seems that most of the conference was on the Miocene. There's some disparity here happening. Anyway, the Miocene was fantastic. We heard today 2 fabulous talks. I thought they were amazing. You know, a new ape skeleton of the middle Miocene. The analysis of this enormous data set to give us ecological structures and insights onto those structures, that was fabulous. Kevin telling us about the diets and the carbonates and the past and in the Miocene sites and many other sites too. And Ellen, who left, by the way, telling us about the marvel of Buluk. I wanted to find, because last year with Louise, we went to Illeret for 2 days, and I saw the team there under a microscope picking out from, you know, imagine a pile of sand that we would normally throw away. They were picking up teeth that they were 0.5 millimeter in size or less. And they sat there day after day, picking up these hundreds of microfauna, which are now being surface scanned. So imagine that. We will not have to squint under the microscope. Anyway, I told Ellen that this entire conference will be there when she blows up the basalt. I think we all should be there. Then we had the Pliocene. And the Pliocene is fantastic. The last talk right now by Denise, how much we're learning from it. We heard about diversity in Ransomili. We now hear about diversity. Oops, sorry. Oh, I'm being disastrous. Wait. about diversity in the environments of Afrenses. We heard from Chalo, he showed us his beautiful Lomekwi mandible. We're still going to think, what will that be? We heard from Jason, again, about diversity at Ileret. And then, of course, the tools. The amazing Pliocene tools that we now have, with a promise of more news to come, right? Rather mysterious. We then went into the early Pleistocene. And the theme was again diversity, which is really interesting, this reassessment of what we know. So we had a talk by José, who told us even the famous skull with the marks of the carnivore, probably another taxon, right? But also looking into the new traits that can actually give us insights that are not homoplasic. And that is so critical right now. We heard from Cody, probably more than this audience ever wanted to know about the ankle. But super interesting ankles. But again, his identification of two groups of ankles, which is very interesting. And then we heard from Lucia, who's also looking at sort of in detail, rather obsessively, at Boisei, and again, coming out with, hey, what if there is a structure here? Why if there was an older population and a slightly later population, and they're doing somewhat different things with those isotopes again? And then we heard from Nacho, who's saying, we have to rethink aspects of the older one, Achillean transition. We should probably get rid of the moment they have these bifaces, we should think of them as Achillean, but then we should recognize also the diversity inside. Then we jump to sort of late middle Pleistocene and upper Pleistocene, and we heard of these strange things. Where is Lee? Is Lee in the room? I just told him, you have to find something normal one day and publish it in AJPA, okay? This is just so outlandish, by the minute, challenging everything we thought. But that is part of it, isn't it? Is if you find a creature out there that doesn't fit your expectations of brain size, doesn't fit your expectations of chronology, doesn't fit your expectations of where they lived. They were cooking deep in the cave. Why? Right? Why go into a tunnel to go cook your meal? And now this issue of the mortuary situation of all these bodies, the number of children, right? So whatever we make out of Naledi will be something that we never thought of before. Then we heard from Ozzy. I'm sorry I didn't put a picture of John, because this is a joint work with John, and he was telling us about all these new bits of Homo kibish, which for me remain the first true modern humans, whatever they want to make out of Jebeli Hood. And from Chalo again, because he was telling us about Natadomeri, which you haven't seen. They're still working, prepping this skeleton, but they have a whole skeleton of a person there at 200, 230, Chalo. So amazing new things coming there. And finally, the last few thousand years, or the present, linking the present to the past, we had Emmanuel there, telling us wonderful things about the pastoralists in the past in the Turkana Basin that has the earliest pastoralists in sub-Saharan Africa. The pastoralists today with those beautiful GPS cows moving about, which I thought was amazing. And that important link of learning from the past to the present. And then we heard from Krishna about the genetics, a super update. And this has stayed with me. 10,000 ancient genomes and less than 3% are African? We have to do something about that. To get a tropical genome, we were part of a study in tropical Southeast Asia, is so much work. It doesn't mean there is no DNA, but the endogenous DNA is minuscule. So the investment to actually amplify sufficient DNA is enormous. And because it will tend to be recent, it will not be a huge publication. So the big labs are not interested. But it means that for us who work in Africa, we're left out of the story. So for me, that is a very serious issue. Okay, a summary of all this and some thoughts. So what do I take out of this week? A lot of food. But first of all, a sense of discovery. This discovery of new ideas, new models, new methods, new fossils, new artifacts, new data. And it was fascinating. It's always fascinating. Open science. Denise, a minute ago, I said, I'm among friends. So no, I'm going out on a limb here. But I think this might be where I'm going. We showed data that has not been published. We shared ideas that we haven't written yet. And that is very special. That is what a scientific community is. Collaborations. TBI has brought a lot of us together. And conferences like this, hopefully with COVID behind us, do it again. Because we meet people, we talk, we say, oh, I saw you on Twitter. And we plan, and we said, oh, we could do this together. And together is always more interesting, always more fun. Bob's maps. I think we all take out of the conference such an amazing admiration for Bob's maps and appreciation, because it will change how we survey and it will change how we go about the space. The importance and challenges of lampposts. I think this group will not forget Bernard's lampposts, and obviously that's the only place where we have light, so that's the only data we find, but we shouldn't forget that they are lampposts. The early career researchers in this room, I thought you were fabulous. You gave polished papers, interesting papers, cutting-edge analysis. You were just fabulous. You should all be extremely proud of yourselves. I go back. Richard, Meave, TBI, the catalyst of a lot of this. And a last, a call for open, fair, and equitable access to scientific resources. This was brought up by many people. There were many talks that somehow touched on this. I just put something from Kevin, the training North-African scientist. He's been deeply involved. I know others. I know Sonia also does. We also do, to less extent. This came from Kay's talk, the importance of those collections and helping those collections be maintained and updated, modernize their curation. And Chalo, talking about digitization, micro-CT, and what decolonizing means. And Dino, who told us, hey, the genomes are online, but there's not a single computer in Kenya that can actually download them and analyze them, right? So we really, as a community, have to do something about this. And I think it's part attitude, part partnership, part collaboration, but also helping our Kenyan colleagues seek the funds and implement ways in which they can do the science at the same level as anybody else. I'm not sure what comes next. Oh, I've got, sorry. But there, in this little end of the story, there's a gap. And that's the gap that actually we are working in. So I thought that I will use the remaining time very fast to tell you a little bit what we've been doing. Before I go there, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Richard. So I met Richard not that long ago, 20 years ago, here at Stony Brook in 2004. It was a fabulous conference. I was looking at the pictures last night. Gosh, we were young. We had a lot of fun, and we met again here at Stony Brook in 2005. And that year, Richard said, come work in Turkana. And we said, no, you know, we're just closing a project. I had a project in India at the time, and we're just closing a project in the Solomon Islands. You don't want to know. So I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. But then I asked him, would you come and open our new research institute? Which he did in May 2006, without telling us that actually he was so very ill, right? He left the hospital to come and open this building, went from this back to the hospital, and a few days later, he had a kidney transplant. Then we met again later that same year. He's obviously better. We had another meeting, and I found this picture of Richard with Philip Tobias. I thought, God, we've got to share that. Also memories of Bill Younger and Bill Kimball, who were at that meeting. On this occasion, Richard said, come work in Turkana. And I said, no, we can't. You know, we finished the Solomon Islands, thanks God. I'm sort of finishing India, but we just put in a big grant for Libya. I said, sorry, there is no way. So then, early in 2007, Richard comes to Cambridge to get an honorary doctorate and wear silly hats, laugh with the Duke. I met his brother, Colin, which was a shock, because it was like seeing Louis Leakey walk into the room. And I thought, oh my God. And then we also met John Joe and his wife, which was an amazing occasion. So that evening at dinner, Richard says, I need you to do me a favor. I said, well, what is that? You came sick to open the center. I'm not going to say no, right? I said, well, could you come to Kenya? Because I have a guest whose language is Spanish, and I'm slightly concerned. Would you please come? I said, yes, of course. Okay. So that was my first trip to Turkana. My first flight on a helicopter, my first flight with Louise on a small plane and seeing the lake from the air. I had met Meave at Stony Brook, but we had never properly chatted. So it was the discovery of Meave. I wish I could remember what we were laughing at. So no, we had such a great time. And then Richard, there was this helicopter floating about because of his guest. And Richard said, oh, Meave, why don't you and Marta go in this helicopter and visit places? Which we did. It was extraordinary, right? We could choose anywhere. We flew everywhere. It was extraordinary. And I found my first fossil. I found a little mandible. I collected it, all the fragments, and Meave said, he'll kill you. So that evening, I had my first row with Richard, of many. And then he accused Meave to plotting with me because she was protecting me and helping and said, let her with her mandible. Anyway, so then Richard's answer to this plot was to say, you're missing a tooth anyway. So then he said, we'll go back by helicopter. We got on the helicopter with him and Kamoya. He said, where is that mandible? You'll find that tooth. Well, thank you. Anyway, which we did, actually. We crawled the place and found the tooth. But in that helicopter ride, we also hovered over this place. And he said, do you have that machine of yours? He meant the GPS. I said, yes. Can you take these points? Because here I'm going to build TBI, which was extraordinary. And the following year, and then of course, wait, let me just say another thing, naive as I was and am, and realized the whole thing was a plot, right? The guest spoke perfectly good English. So there was no Spanish situation in this case, right? But he said, which day are you coming back? I said, okay, next year. Anyway, but next year TBI was happening, the buildings were going up and everything was going, and Richard asked Kamoya to take us back to this place of the mandible. And because I had said, you know, I've never done this before, I said, Kamoya will show you, right? So Rob and I went for a season with Kamoya, a short season, to figure out how to work in Turkana. And since then, we've had a number of projects. And I want to tell you super fast, a little bit, very fast, what we have been doing. So this place is down there. This enlarged lake is a, is a high lake level rendition of Lake Turkana. So you can see up there where it meets the Sobat system, up near Kivish up there. And we work in this area, which has this other very large floodplain. And the reason I put it full, because we always show it at current lake level, is that anything we find is a snapshot in time when the lake was high. So we really have no insight of who was there or what was happening when the lake was low. So what have we found? So this is, so imagine, can I go back one? So that tip there, sticking out there, is Lothagam, right? So the area where we work in is about 20 kilometers south of Lothagam, more or less. And if you think Lothagam is up there, and this is the area, this is where we've been working most of the time for the last nearly 3 years. We're also working east of the Kerio. I'm not going to talk today about that. It's a fascinating place, another time. So on this West Kerio plain, we have a series of sites. The vast majority are African humid period sites. The African humid period covers everything. So if you note in white is African humid period. Up here at 452 meters above sea level, there's an African humid period layer, huge. You see all those huge shell mountains that you see south of Lothagam, right? Which means that everything was at one point at least covered by the lake in the last 10,000 years. So the deposits from this last lake are everywhere, and they have become both a distraction, sort of interest, and a nightmare, because they're literally everywhere. We cannot ignore it while we're trying to work on the older things, but also because we have a very nice relationship with the local communities and the local chiefs who think these skeletons are the coolest thing. So they come and say, Dr. Marta, Dr. Rob, there's another skeleton there that needs looking after. And so, you know, it's 4 days, 5 days digging of 3-4 people for one skeleton when you're working on something else. So it's a form also of salvage archaeology that we have to sort of factor in all we do. But we also have a few Upper Pleistocene sites, a number of mid-late Pleistocene localities, early Middle Pleistocene localities, earliest Middle Pleistocene localities, and early Pleistocene localities across the Kerio. So let me tell you a little bit, 2 slides, of the Holocene. So the African humid period, which we have modeled, we have, I don't know, like 100 radiocarbon dates, and we've modeled the ups and downs of the lake. And you can see in the sediments, you can see the shell, the beach layers, right? And the beaches are just chock full of material. I mean, it's just a density unbelievable. And then gullies cut them, and they just wash down. And in there, strangely enough, humans are about 1/3. I know there's a bias in what we collect and what we record, so we don't record fish. I'm sure if we had the fish there, these proportions would change. The fish is the floor, right? So fish is just a constant element. But it's more just about the same number of people as hippopotamus, which is pretty strange. I should also say that these are not archaeological sites. It's just a landscape. There's nothing to it. So the people are there dead with everything else. Most of them are fragments of elements, not whole skeletons. I think there's 1,200 something fragments of people. Every element present. It's an amazing collection, actually. The paleodelta of the Kerio, the people are quite different, more robust than the ones on the lacustrine edge. The paleodelta also has funny fauna, has rhinos, has a strange pig. Thuri tells me that the bush pigs have the wrong isotope value, has a strange crocodile. So fascinating aspects of a fauna that's only 10,000 years old. We know they were fishing, or we think they were fishing, because we found over 700 barb bone harpoons. So part of the problem is describing this is taking us years and years and years and years, but we're getting there. And with Lawrence, we're talking about monographs coming out of this. Anyway, so just a little bit about the people. Like I said, it's in the hundreds. This is this lovely girl in there. She remembers. I told her, please, can you click? Anyway, and these people, like I said, are super interesting. And besides the morphology, they have these occurrence of violence. So we publish one case, the Natarup, which is a group of skeletons in semi-proximity that have clear evidence of violence, included embedded lithics. But there are others. We have a number of other isolated cases, you know, obsidian in the spine, smashed head, a blunt force trauma on a pelvis, a sharp trauma on the other pelvis. There's a lot. And then, again, thoughts of Curtis and his argument about warfare with greater sedentism, with greater predictable resources, and then that you have to actually fight for and control those territories. It's interesting, and we were talking with Ndiema, all the embedded weapons we found and that Robbins found in that foot in Lothagam many years ago are obsidian, and we have virtually no obsidian there. So we're talking with Emmanuel about being able to trace that obsidian. Okay, abandon the Holocene. So a little quick look at three of the Upper Pleistocene sites. They're of different ages. So the site of Ingingolea, as you see, is featureless. There's nothing. It's just a flat piece of desert. But on the surface, there were bits of this skull, a floor of MSA, and then the excavations revealed more. The skull is interesting. It's a modern human, but it's a very large, robust modern human that we are finishing the publication now. And these I put for Curtis because we talked the other day. So the MSA is a very nice MSA, mostly on phonolites, but it has Lupemban points. And then it has these strange little cores. They are volumetric cores with a top made of a disc core, and in some cases where the tip may have been used. It's very strange. There are many, many, many of them, and no. There's a site called Lomanimania, which is a napping event. So from this site, we can refit all the pieces. They go deep, 1.5 meters, 2 meters in the trench. And again, these phonolite, lovely pieces. And then there's the site of Longarankat, which we actually have not studied very much. We were there for, I don't know, 3-4 days. It has very nice fauna, covered in MSA, MSA in the trenches. The trenches were really for the animals rather than the MSA. But I put it here because that's the site with the elephant that Thuri mentioned. So the one that he's excited about, the isotopes. So then, moving on to the middle Pleistocene, our biggest issue is dating these sites. So most of our dates are uranium series dates. We now have, in Paris, they're doing the uranium series with ESR. We have a couple of OSLs for the younger sequence. However, Marine, where is Marine? She left. Okay, but Marine is coming in February, and she will sample them all, which is fabulous. Okay, so how these sites, again, if you look, featureless, virtually featureless, and they're made of tilted sandstones, and in between the parallel tilted sandstones, there are these infills. These infills have these horizontal floors of stromatolites. So what these stromatolites are telling us that, there was a quiet, gentle, stable water of about 1 meter high on top. So we can say that the Middle Pleistocene actually had the same high lake level regime as we see until today. And this has implications on our depiction of the shape of the basin in the last million years, which is one of the question marks. These stromatolites, besides being very beautiful, sometimes they form floors connected one to the other. Some are enormous, I mean, they're quite extraordinary. They're also full of fossils inside. So one of the things we are working with 2 teams, one in Spain, one in France, is if we can date the fossils, we can then date the stromatolites, and the stromatolites are a major stratigraphic marker here. So we believe there are 3 layers of stromatolites. This is the one that Rob showed that has the entire Elephas tooth, Reki tooth inside. But that's a set of carnivore teeth. I mean, they're lovely. Okay, from the group of sites that is late-ish Middle Pleistocene, they're interesting, they're different. We have 2 elements of extinct animals there. Metrodocoeros is still there. So if we think this site, the dates we have is 250, 300, and we also have gorgops there. Otherwise, the rest of the fauna is more or less current fauna. We have some hominins. I put 2 here, one because it's this huge humerus, and also these 2 parietals. We now found the other half of that other parietal. And this is a squat set of parietals, broad and squat, they're complete. So these are not modern human, it's not a modern human head. The other images come from the older set of sites, including the one that we have now a date of 750. And that's a different world. In terms of the fauna, there are actually 6 pigs there. We have 3 different crocodiles, whole skeletons. I mean, it's fabulous. Giant turtles, etc. I mean, it's a very, very rich fauna. And we have a series of hominins that we are currently working on the description. In particular, that small hominin head, which John has already seen some time ago, it's the size of Homo naledi. So just dropping that there. Okay, so we think that actually this gap can be filled. And I am sure that this is not the only place in the basin where these sediments exist. They're different. Rob always says, God, there are people working in the Pleistocene, they have 100 meters of sediment. We're lucky if we have 2, right? Most of the sediment is 1 meter or less. So it's a very different depositional landscape, partly because I imagine everything's been washed away by recurrent lakes transgressions. But they're there. And we're talking again with Marine. When we went with Louise and Miv to Illeret, look for the Guamdi site. We found the Guamdi site. And that needs actually a good trench. Marine will do the good OSLs we were discussing this week. And because there are other Middle Pleistocene sites. And I think it's critical that we explore them. Why? Okay, we know that's more or less the age. And John, I'm ignoring all the introgression lines, okay? So picture this with lines crossing everywhere, okay? So as a sort of structure, we know that somewhere between 200 and 300,000 is what the genetics tell us we have the last common ancestor of modern humans. That must have split from another population in Africa, right? We also know that between 400 and 500, we have the last common ancestor of Denisovans and Neanderthals. We also know that the separations of the Sapiens lineage and the Neanderthal-Denisovan lineage is somewhere between 750 and 550,000. So these are long space of time between these events, but also a constant focus on this age number 1. Number 1 is the age of the last common ancestor of people who are alive today. The moment we have those African ancient genomes, that date will be older. So we have a lineage that is in fact probably 700,000 years old. And then at some point, our lineage has to split from another, So that drove me to think, we're looking also, I mean, there are 2 different things to be looked at. One is the Middle Pleistocene, because who's there? I mean, his ancestors of modern humans are there, and possibly the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans are there. But also we have to look further back in time to understand what is creating the origin of that encephalized lineage. And what is interesting, so this is adapted, I adapted this from a paper by Grant et al. In 2017, and they created an aridity index. Give me 3 minutes. And this aridity index is important because in the tropics, the impact of the climate change is so different. So what you see in here, they have 3 million. I put here the last 1.2, is this massive dry episode, which is actually when Olorgesailie was dry, right? One of the very few other records we have. But also these wet episodes, and in green are the presumed green Saharas, also looking at sapropels, where dispersals could happen and population expansions could happen. So how does that affect our thinking of this? So that mega drought is just when we are, or the genetics with those huge confidence intervals, let's not forget, are estimating the splitting of those lineages. While all that structure, probably full of admixture and full of introgression, is happening in periods where there's much more persistent wet episodes. And of that time, we know nothing. So, 3. So what can we say? For the period before the lineage of modern humans, our knowledge is minimal. We have this set of fossils, Dhaka, Buya, one completely different from the other, Eritrea, Ethiopia. We have the Olorgesailie frontal, which is smaller than the one that we found, and is in fact smaller than Naledi. And we have this massive mandible at Tiganif. So we do not have at the moment any idea of the ancestors to our encephalized lineage. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum and say, well, who was around between 400 and 200? So this Kivish with the wrong date should be 230. Who was around? And there's all sorts of people around, right? There's Naledi, Florisbat, there's Kabwe, Irhud, Ilai Springs from Turkana, Ndutu, they're all around there, and the diversity is huge. but we don't know who they are, right? So, looking at the case of the Turkana hominins that we are finding, my guess is that they contribute to different bits of this lineage, including this that I think existed, and I think Lee and his collaborators are showing us so clearly, a small brain African Homo lineage of long standing, of which we have more than one candidate. So, I need to rush. Okay, actually, I'll leave it. Will the girl remember? Okay, I want to stop or end with my last slide before acknowledgments. It didn't work. Okay, so those are our sites. It's a drop in the ocean. It has taken us 16 years trying to figure out the dates, figure out what's happening, and it's a drop in the ocean. We cannot address our big questions as long as we have this tiny representation in space and time. And that matters. The problem is that we are in a risk-averse moment in funding. So young people tell me, they say, I want to go to that place in the Congo, and I want to go to that place in Zambia, etc. And they do not get the funding. But I think that people who get big projects, I've been lucky, I've got several big projects, we can sponsor that exploration. We can partner with that exploration. But without it, we can keep on finding fossils and describing them, and we will not answer any questions. Okay, acknowledgments. Alicia, I couldn't find a picture. Sorry. Okay, my first thanks are obviously TBI, Stony Brook, National Geographic, but Lawrence and Fred, who put this conference together, and Alicia, who made it happen. I think this conference is very, very special. My next thanks is to TBI itself. Do you know, those of us who spent part of our life there, we love it. Do you know, we just love the place, love the buildings, love coming out of the field to those beautiful showers and hot breakfasts, like Kevin was saying, but also arriving and finding that Kevin took the tonic for your gin and tonic, or that, you know, or that other person has just been, or delaying your flight a day so that you just cross with somebody and have a chat and share what you found. So TBI is super special. I want to thank the National Museums of Kenya and our two colleagues from there who are here today for their passion, facing strong adversity in many situations, with which they keep the collections that we all love and study. And a special mention to Tom Muhuyu, who is just fantastic, right? And he's just reboxed and relined the entire hominin room. He did it through COVID. On his own, he went to work every day. We talked on Zoom occasionally. Oh, should I cut it this way? Should I cut it that way? And he reboxed, relined, refoamed the entirety of the hominins. Finally, thank the people of Turkana who welcome us every year. Thank Rob and me, Richard and Meave for everything they've done and all the inspiration. And thank Rob.